What is up, Gala gamers? Welcome back to another Champions Arena video. Now this video is meant to be a hero tier list, but I realize you guys don't need a hero tier list. You just need to know which champions are good, worth leveling, promoting, and using. So here are the must-use champions or the must-have champions in Champions Arena. So let's get to it. So we're here on the Champions Arena Hub, brought to you by the guys over at Hydra. Because the game is currently down for an extended period of maintenance, they have found an exploit or bug during the bridging or minting process where it seems to allow people to duplicate heroes and then get them on the market, on the official Gala Games Champions Arena market, and sell them for dirt cheap. So it's currently under maintenance, so we're going to be using the fantastic Champions Arena Hub. Before we do get started, however, if you don't have a Gala Games account or plan to buy anything from the Gala Games store, then please use my link below. You do not lose anything and they give me a little cut of whatever you buy. So if any of you guys are gonna purchase the rep node, hook a brother up and use my link in the description. Now let's move on to champion stats. So here you have a page of basically all the champions in Champions Arena. We are going to start off by excluding the epic and legendaries because most of them are useful, and we're just going to focus on common, uncommon, and rare. Now, the things you should take into consideration are basically the conditions, the rarity, and what union you need. Let's start off with common, work way to uncommon, and then to rare. So the first common champion that you should consider using is Easy05. The main reason you should be using him is because his passive combines well with his second skill, which then increases the damage of his third skill. So basically you get a damage buff every time there is a buff applied on this hero. The second skill gives you a couple of buffs, the first one being speed up, and then if you card match it gives you crit rate and crit damage up, and any buff that is applied to this champion gives a 12% damage to his flamethrower, which is an AoE damage attack. His basic attack also gives you 1 mana, which is always good. Now we move on to uncommons, and the best uncommon support by far has to be Zyma. Zyma's passive gives you 1 mana at the start of each of his turns, and his first attack can generate 2 mana if you card match. So basically you can get 3 mana a turn, which is equivalent to some of the summoner spells. That means you can use a summoner spell as soon as this guy gets his turn. And his second ability gives attack up for your DPS characters, and his third ability gives you a barrier equal to 50% of attack, or if you card match, 75% of attack. So basically he's got a jack of all trades. He can generate mana, he can give you a buff, and he can give you some form of defensives. The DPS champion of the uncommons is BB0. He basically buffs himself, starts with a speed boost, and has really good damage numbers for when you're attacking with card match. He can also generate 1 mana from his basic attacks, and if you keep stacking buffs on him, he can destroy the early campaign and tower levels for you. Now we move on to rare champions, and the first rare champion that you should consider using is Leopold. He is a really good tank because his passive gives him a 35% chance to take the damage of an ally with the highest attack, and that damage is reduced by 30%. So you're relying on a bit of RNG here, but he can basically keep your attacker alive for a long time if his guardsman duty procs. He can also generate 2 mana on the first attack, inflict a status effect which is attack down on his second attack, and his third attack has a chance to taunt if you card match. So you can basically lock down a champion to continue attacking the tank, which is Leopold, and you have a chance to block the damage which your highest champion is taking if the guardsman duty procs. Next we have Kimberly, and Kimberly is the AoE damage dealer of the rares. He basically has an AoE damage on his third skill, and if you card match there is a chance to stun. If you fail to escape from his third skill, he will get stunned for 1 turn, so it is like a double-edged sword with relying on RNG to stun the enemies. You also have a fairly good passive which gives you crit rate up and crit power up. And his second skill is like a damage over time effect, which leaves a time bomb that explodes at a later date. And his first skill can generate mana and does increase damage. Next up, we have Justina. Justina is a fairly good support in the rare category. Her passive gives you a 50% chance to remove a debuff. Her basic attacks can generate 2 mana if you card match. She can give you attack up when you card match, and you can get assist, which basically means if the champion you assist does an attack, Justina will also do a basic attack. Now I'm not sure if it triggers the basic attack card match as well, but if it does, then you can gain a lot of mana with this champion. Her third skill basically grants reflect damage for an ally, and if you card match, it increases your turn gauge also. Next up, we have G&D, and these guys are the damage dealers of the rare category. Main reason being, the passive is Gordon will shoot each turn, dealing 10% of your attack and leave a mark on the target. Now, what mark does is that the enemy champion that is marked will be taking 30% more damage, but Durden spells all include the mark. So basically, if you card match, the mark damage will be increased to 40%. If you card match your second attack, his mark damage will be increased to 50%. And if you card match on his third skill, the mark damage is increased to 70%. Now, this basically means if you attack the champion that is marked, you're guaranteed to deal insane damage. And if you have a good support champion to buff the damage of this champion, you're guaranteed kills. Let's head back over to the list. Now, there are some other good rare champions. For example, Oak Akon, Bolton, and you have GALA. They're all fairly good tanks that provide useful benefits. Oak Akon can taunt, give you mana and gain regen. GALA can give you debuffs. And Bolton is generally a offensive-ish tank because it deals damage and has AoE damage on his third skill. So that was the common, uncommon, and rares. Now we're going to turn these off and switch on epic and legendaries. And before we start, I just have to say pretty much every epic and legendary is useful depending on how you build them and depending on the team composition. But I am going to give you a bunch of my favorites. So if you do pull them or you plan to buy them, then you can keep an eye out for these. So the first one we have is Barbosa. His basic attacks can generate 2 mana. He has a chance to inflict stun. His third skill is AoE damage that decreases the turn gauge and steals target speed if it is higher. And his second attack, you can steal the target's turn gauge and steals more if the speed is higher. So overall good AoE champion and generates mana, can produce some status effects. Next up, we have my favorite striker in the epic tier, and that is Beckett. Beckett has a interesting passive which is called Inquisitor's Will. Beckett begins with Will of Judgment at the start of the battle. If Will of Judgment is lost, he gains Resolute at the start of his turn, regains Will of Judgment upon stacking 3 times. His basic attack generates mana. His second attack deals really good single target damage, and his third attack is AoE damage when card match increases damage further. And if you have Will of Judgment, it increases it by another 50%. Does really good AoE single target and generates mana. Next up, we have Bjorn. Now, Bjorn's mechanics are a bit different. Now, instead of using the attack stat, his skills scale off defense. So basically, he's a tank character and you want to be building defense. So you're kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. But his gimmick is Pride of the Vikings, which gives him 5 blessing stacks. And you lose 1 blessing each time Bjorn is attacked. Now, because he's a tank, I think it should work the other way. Every time he is hit, he gets a stack, which increases the skill potential. But the first skill, if you card match, reduces the turn gauge by 15%. The second skill can reduce the turn gauge by the amount of Blessing of Vikings you have by 6% for each blessing on the character. And the third skill, which is the one I like and I use, which is Sealed Blade. It does 110% of your defense as AoE damage and inflicts defense down. Now, if you card match, it inflicts defense down for 2 turns, and it ignores the target's resistances for every count of Blessing of the Viking you have on yourself, and the damage gets increased. Next up, we have Dante. Now, Dante is a really good damage dealer. He has 2 forms. He has his basic form, and then he has his demon form. So what you want to do with Dante is the passive here. You want to build stacks of madness, and when you reach 4 stacks of madness, Dante will turn into the abyssal/demon form, and the abyssal/demon form has really good self buffs and AoE damage. But with its passive, you lose 10% of your HP every time you attack, but your attack increases by 3% for every stack of madness. Now, madness enhances Dante's skills. It gives you crit rate up, life drain up, and the third skill gives you a bunch of AoE and increased damage if you card match for the amount of madness you have. The basic ones increase turn gauge, grant madness, and deal single target damage. Next up, Death Barrel. Death Barrel has a really interesting passive, which basically means he can become immortal as long as he kills a champion. So if you get this hero to kill another hero, you basically gain immortality. And if you continue to kill a bunch of heroes, you can never die. He has fairly good single target damage. And if you have immortal active, you can get crit when you use his third ability, which is called Scream of Vengeance. Next up, we have one of the best tankers in the game, which is Durax. He pretty much carries you through everything in Champions Arena, be it Tower of Trials, Mayhem, Arena, Campaign. This guy will get you where you need to go and provide insane value. So his passive is Slaughterfest, and anytime your ally dies, he will deal his third skill on the enemy team for free. So you're basically getting a 3-slot card for free, activating every time your ally dies. His first skill has a chance to taunt, his second skill has a chance to stun, and his third skill is an AoE damage, and it can be triggered off the passive like I said. Really good, solid overall tank. Can be bought on OpenSea because he was included in the Champions Arena box, and some people did pull him and use him to progress really fast through the campaign. Next up we have Isabel. Isabel can generate mana on her basic attack, can deal status effects on her second attack, and her third attack is an AoE damage that can decrease the target's turn gauge and defense if you have playtime active. Playtime is active if you have above 70% HP, and it will be consumed if the HP is below that. Overall, a solid choice for an AoE champion. Next up we have Jacob. Now Jacob is one of the most annoying people to fight, mainly because his passive marks a random target with wanted, and if he hits that random target, they get a time bomb on them for 2 turns that will detonate after the second turn. His basic attack is really good single target damage. His second attack places a time bomb, and if you card match, restores turn gauge by 20%. And his third attack deals AoE damage and places a time bomb on the targets. And if the target already has a time bomb, that damage is increased by 60%. So overall, a good AoE damage dealing champion. Next up, we have Kazos. Kazos is really good tank because his second ability grants 2 stacks of attack on himself. He heals himself, and at the end of his turn, he sacrifices 3% of his max health to heal all his allies for 2%. So you're basically trading 3% health for 6% health across the other 3 champions. Now, when it's down to 1-on-1, you are losing the benefit, but still it's an okay-ish passive gimmick. His basic attacks generate 2 mana if you card match, and his third ability can inflict hit rate down, which basically means the enemies won't be hitting your champions, and you have attract, so they have to hit your champion if they do want to hit. Next up, we have Kenneth. Overall, a good crit rate and crit rate power buffer, useful with Selena and champions that do crit rate. Basic attack generates mana, and his passive is basically built for champions with crit. Next up, we have Murnoff. He's fairly good because his gimmick is stacking coins, and his first ability generates mana, second ability generates coins, and his third ability, which is Money or Precious, deals AoE damage, and if you card match and have more than 5 coins, he has a chance to stun 1 random enemy for a turn. So AoE damage, single target damage, and a bit of CC thrown in there for you. Next up, we have Nina. Now this champion's amazing because if you card match, you can get 3 mana with her basic attacks. She can grant barriers and remove debuffs to your allies. If you card match, the barrier strength increases and it removes 2 debuffs. The third skill heals all allies and removes debuffs. And her passive basically increases a turn gauge when an ally is inflicted with a debuff. Overall, solid support champion. Next up, we have the Ripple, and Ripple is known for her sleep, which is granted by her second skill when you card match. She can also gain 2 mana, and she can grant speed up to all allies with her third skill. Her passive is she begins with 4 stacks of fairy dust at the start of the battle and consumes 1 stack upon being hit, gains 2 stack when an enemy dies. Next up we have Roxanne, and she also has 2 forms. She has a basic form and her dragon form. A basic form gives her turn gauge up, grants her crit rate up, and her third skill transforms her into a dragon. The way you do that is with her passive, which generates 1 dragon rune when Roxanne's turn begins and when an ally excluding self deals critical damage. So she works well with a crit build. Then when you are in dragon form, you basically deal damage over time effects and insane AoE damage with most of her skills. And when you run out of dragon runes, she reverts back to her normal form. So ideally you want to stack as much as you can and deal a bunch of damage while in this form. And she hurts like a truck. Next up we have Sana. Overall a fairly good support. Her gimmick is Power of Divination, which increases her speed for every active buff on her allies, and she's basically the one that generates the buffs on her allies because her third skill and second skill both provide buffs. Her second skill grants crit rate up, and if you card match you also remove 2 debuffs, and her third skill grants attack up, and if you card match it grants damage boost. Basically, if you do both of these skills, you're guaranteed to max out Power of Divination, which is a 10 stack passive, which gives a 30% increase to speed. Her base attack also generates 1 mana and 2 if you card match. Next up, we have Selena. Selena is the crit champion and the champion you get in the battle pass. Basically has buffs that generate crit, pairs well with Sana, also pairs well with other champions that help increase crit rate or get effects from crit rate. Next up we have Trixie, and Trixie's passive is Death Trick. Basically Trixie gains trap cards based on the level of energy used. So basically if it's a 3-star card, you gain 3 trap cards. If she has 6 trap cards, when she takes damage enough to die, She spends all of them and resurrects herself with 20% health. Now her gimmick is basically like Twisted Fate. You get red, blue instead of gold. You get green cards and each deal different effects on both her second and third skill. You ideally want to get lucky and get the green ones because they do the most effect and most damage. Now we move on to the legendary champions, and I have to say basically all legendary champions are amazing depending on how you use them, but here are some of my favorites. We're going to start off with Zafir. Zafir deals insane AoE damage with his third skill. If you combine it with his passive, it can increase every time. If you pair it with its second skill and passive, basically every buff on him increases damage by 15%. And if his buff is active, you can get direct hit, which basically ignores resistances, defense, damage reductions, any buffs on the target. So you can basically destroy enemies in AoE form with this legendary character. His basic attacks also generate 2 mana if you card match. Then we have Vera, and Vera is insane AoE damage as well as CC, which is freeze. So if you have the speed down condition on the target, there is a chance they will be frozen 100% of the time. You pair Vera with a champion such as Devi or Stan because they inflict speed down on all enemies, or you pair her with the rare champion, which is GALA, which I have turned off. But basically, his third ability also inflicts speed down, and if you combine them with Vera, you're basically guaranteed insane clearing speed and AoE damage. Next we move on to Violet. Violet has fairly good passives which basically decrease attack or defense. She has AoE damage on her third skill, her second one inflicts attack down and damage reduction, and her basic attack generates mana. Overall a solid AoE choice. Next up we have Kage, which was available in the bundle. His basic attack generates mana. His second attack recovers his turn gauge and deals damage. His third attack deals insane damage. If you land a crit, you have a 70% chance to get another turn. His passive is Shadow Beast and grants Mark of the Beast to an enemy for 1 turn when attacked by Kage. Increases the crit rate by 20% when Kage attacks the target with Mark of the Beast. So he pairs really well with a crit build and a crit team. Now the final legendary champion that I've looked into is Desmonia. Her gimmick is she uses the attack of an ally with the highest attack, and she can generate 3 mana on her basic attacks. She has AoE damage on her third skill. She can gain mana on her second skill and inflict attack down. And as long as she is alive and on the field, you take 15% less damage. So overall, a really good support, on an offensive support, but you don't use your attack. You're basically using your striker or your highest champion's attack. So you can build her with HP and defense and make sure she survives, giving you the passive to take less damage, and basically like having a second striker because you're damaging with that striker's attack. Now don't forget guys, you should also look into the conditions of the champions that you have. Most of them are going to be bad, but the higher tiers like epic and legendary do have some very good and normal stats. Ideally, you don't want to be using the ones that have very bad, but if they work in your team, then go for it. Just don't use them on the conditions, or be careful when you do use them when the conditions are not right. They will not be as powerful as they normally are. That's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully you guys have learned what champions are good at lower levels, mid-tier levels, and higher levels. Most high-level champions are amazing, but you can't pull them as luckily as the lower tier. So it might be worth leveling the lower tier until you get a decent epic or legendary champion, and then focus on leveling those up, because the lower tiers are easier to level, promote, and use, and the higher tiers you have to spend money to progress them, which is mainly what the Wells are doing to rank really high in Arena right now. But it depends on your situation, your team, the time you spend on the game, and there's a whole bunch of factors. As always guys, if you enjoyed the video, then hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, and turn on that notification bell, because it's free and it's the easiest way to support me as a content creator. If you don't have a GALA Games account or do plan to buy anything from the store, including GALA Gold, then please use my link below. As I said before, you don't lose nothing and I get a little bit of a cut. If you plan to buy rep nodes, then hook a brother up. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.